Well, we have an absolutely massive update on the Wu flu today. Late last night, the Hubei province announced that there were 15,000 new cases in a single day, which obviously is a massive increase percentage-wise versus any other single day that this whole process has been going on of them reporting the cases every day. This is the biggest percentage increase, and apparently the reason for this is that China has been lying this whole time about how many new cases there were. Now, they didn't exactly say that they've been lying, but they pretty much admitted it. They said that they have got a new way of determining how many cases there are. Apparently, their story is that, well, before we were only reporting cases that we tested in a lab, and put the petri dish in and did the full on test, and now we're reporting all the cases that are clinically diagnosed, which I guess means that they don't go through the full rigmarole, which sounds like it's going to give us a much more accurate measure. Because obviously, with an outbreak of this size, there's going to be way more people taking up beds in hospitals over this virus than they have time to go through and do a full lab test on. And of course, this pretty much confirms 100% what a lot of us have been saying about these COOF camps, as Mr. Mediocre is calling them, the quarantine camps. Some folks are calling them the death camps, where they are sending people who are suspected of having the Wu flu, locking them essentially in these big buildings with no bathrooms and no doctors and no medical equipment. All those people pretty much are going undiagnosed. And this is probably still the case. I think that all that China is doing now is just saying, well, we're reporting everyone who is in the hospital now, even the folks who we haven't gone through and exactly tested yet, but we're fairly certain about. And so my guess is that even though this is a massive new number, the way they're counting it, and of course this is just for this one day, they're not counting all the new cases that they didn't count for over the past month, because every day there were cases that they weren't counting because they weren't using this same standard. They're not going to go back and update those numbers, I don't think, certainly. But even now, with this more accurate, method of accounting, they're not going far enough. They are likely still way underreporting the number of cases. So the Wu flu is showing no sign of stopping. Things are only getting worse at this point. And it's quite shocking to see that there are still, in one day, 15,000 new cases, even in this underreported metric in Hubei province, because look at what they've done there. They've locked down every part of the entire province, especially Wuhan. People do not go outside. All their food is brought to them, I believe, by the government. Nobody's leaving. They're just, they're cooped up in their apartments, trying not to get sick, not leaving bed for the most part. And the government's going around, spraying bleach foggers everywhere, trying to kill anything that's in the air, and yet this virus is still getting everyone. And so it seemed to me that this is, most certainly airborne at this point. I don't know how else that this could be working. I mean, there was one case that Chris Martenson found in Hong Kong, to where it seemed like that it was moving through the pipes, but of course that was waterborne, which was a little different. I didn't think that was that significant. That there were leaky pipes, and sewage and things. I mean, that's the same way that cholera spreads, is through poor sanitation. But in the case of Wuhan, it seems much more significant than that. It seems like that this is, just it's in the air, and that you can catch it everywhere, because there's so many people that have it that are sick that no matter where you go around there, you're going to be close enough to catch it. And the only way to keep yourself safe, it would seem, would be if you somehow found a way to seal off your apartment and filter all the air that goes in and out. Now, the Chinese seem to be, I think at this point, coming out of the denial stage and moving into the panic stage as far as the government goes. Because, of course, the Chinese have been trying to deny how bad this is. And now today, that they've, released this increase in cases, thanks to their new methodology. The Hubei party boss has been forced to resign, and he's been replaced with someone else. But of course, resignations aren't going to make this problem go away. The problem is just starting to get bad. And I think the fact that the Chinese, are being more open now with the numbers, still not completely open, but more open than they have been, is a sign of that. That they know that they can't keep this under control, so they can't lie that bad. They have to start, conditioning people to understand that things are getting very, very bad. And so they can't just all at once admit okay, it's way worse than we said this whole time. They want to, scale the lie back bit by bit. It seems like this is getting way out of hand and that the Chinese have no way of stopping it. They have no plan, and I don't know what Winnie the Pooh's going to do. I mean, this, frankly, if it continues to get this bad and the panic, ensues and spreads across all of China, let alone the rest of the world, I'll get to that in a minute, you very well could see a destabilization even of the political system, which has been so rock solid in China since 1949. The police state is doing its best to clamp down on these people, but I mean, even despite that, people are getting information out about how bad things are there. People, they're trying to kill an infectious disease by just killing people, and frankly, that's not going to do you any good in the long run. I think that this may be the first example in the 20th century or the 21st century of how police state tactics are not as effective as they used to be. That's my hope that we're going to see out of this whole thing. Is that in the 1930s, had this occurred, say in Stalin's Russia, just like with the Holodomor, he would have been able to do a good enough job of suppressing all this information and keeping the world from understanding. But in this case, in the information age, even though the government has so many better tools now than they did in the 1930s to control and suppress people, there was a terrible, scary video of a drone flying around a traffic jam, ordering people to scan a QR code so that they could be identified and so that the government knew who was in this traffic jam. Very spooky stuff, but as the power of the state has increased technologically, so has the power of the individual citizens. And let's be clear, the reason why this party boss got fired in Hubei is not because he did anything wrong. It's because the people of China want blood. They're angry at the government. They blame the government for, one, lying about this, and then, two, for letting it spread. Because the big legitimizing factor with the Chinese government is that, you give us your civil liberties in exchange for, economic prosperity and security and all these other things. We'll take care of them. You just have to trust us. So far, as a whole, the Chinese people have taken that bargain. They accepted that because China's gotten so much richer over the last 40 years. Under the Communist Party, whether you think it's because of them or not, things have gotten a lot better. So people have accepted that bargain. But if things get worse under the Communist Party and then they become more oppressive, that is when they are going to provoke perhaps not outright rebellion, but disloyalty on the part of their subjects. That is what the Communist Party should be most concerned about right now, is that this whole Wu flu incident exposes their weakness. It makes them lose that veil of infallibility, because look, even though the Communist Party was in charge, something really bad still happened. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying outright that the Wu flu is going to bring down the Chinese Communist Party or anything crazy like that. All I'm saying is that it's this sort of thing that brings down governments like China. This is what their real weakness is. And so I'm not saying it will. All I'm saying is that it could. We still have to see how bad this gets and how bad the party bungles it. But so far, they've bungled it pretty bad, and we're still in the early stages. This has not gotten nearly as bad throughout China. The place where it's really bad right now is Wuhan. Imagine, though, if instead of it just being really, really bad in Wuhan, if it was really bad in Shanghai and in Beijing and in, I can't say Nanking because that's the same as Beijing. But anyway, I mean, especially Hong Kong. Hong Kong, of course, was unstable to begin with. But people there pretty much had already lost faith in the Chinese Communist Party. One city, though, rising up is not going to be enough to throw off the yoke of the CCP. I don't think that Hong Kong would win its independence without a complete and total collapse of the CCP all throughout China. But again, if things get really, really bad in the whole country all at once, the opportunity is there. Now, of course, as bad as things are in China, things have not gotten very bad outside of China. And some people seem to be wondering why that is. And I don't think it's that big of a mystery. It's not that big of a deal to me that they say, oh, well, there's only 58 people who have it in Singapore, or only 20 people who have it in Japan, and all this other stuff. And it's like, yeah, but this spread really slowly, in China too, because the growth on this sort of thing is exponential. So when you're starting from a small number, it's not going to go up that much that quick. It gets to a point to where you reach a point on the curve to where it just shoots straight up, which of course China is in right now. But for these other places, you can't look at them directly next to Wuhan and say, well, it's going up so much faster in Wuhan. You have to look at, where Wuhan was at, like, in November or December, because back then there weren't a lot of new cases in Wuhan. We didn't start to see a lot of new cases in Wuhan until mid-January, and then it all of a sudden exploded. So you have to wonder, in a couple months, Singapore probably will not be a very nice place to be. Singapore may very well be the next Wuhan. Of course, look at these other cities in China, like Shenzhen, or I think even Shanghai, to where you're starting to see new epicenters form. Sticks, X, and Hammer has talked a lot about this, because that's really what he's been watching, and I think it's a keen thing to observe, is to see how in these new cities that aren't Wuhan, where the virus has got established, how fast things are spreading. And it's taken a while because, I remember when they were still in the double digits in the cities outside of Wuhan. And now all of a sudden we're in, quadruple digits. And, and not too long, you'll have tens of thousands of cases that are in cities that are not Wuhan. And that's, when things become a worry. These other places where it does become established locally and you have local transmission, I think that it'll be way worse outside of China because China is uniquely positioned to impose these draconian quarantines, as I've said, and the virus is still spreading like mad. Even with those terrible measures that China's, imposed, they haven't been able to contain this. So other countries like Singapore, Singapore's a fairly authoritarian place by Western standards, but nothing like compared to China. They will not be able to contain this. I mean, it's something like 5 million people living in 250 square miles. Hong Kong is another one, since Hong Kong has certain freedoms that mainland China is not entitled to. It's already going to become a big problem there. I think those two cities, Singapore and Hong Kong, are going to be in very bad shape in about a month or two. But then there are other places outside of Wuhan, like, of course, Tokyo, Japan, where you would expect, because there's a lot of Chinese people coming through and out there. We've heard of a few cases there. I don't know necessarily if you have local transmission too much in Japan, but there are people who are coming in and who have no idea how they got the virus. But because of this long incubation period, in some cases up to 24 days now, we know, we may not know for a long time. This virus could be very well established in plenty of cities around the world, and we just simply will not know for another month or two. And so with that said, if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.